Hello everyone, my name is James Slowinski, and this is my project. It's on the death penalty in the United States. So, the death penalty has been a very controversial topic in the United States for the past century or so. The controversy surrounding it has really been brought to light recently by Supreme Court rulings and media such as the Just Mercy film. In the past, the death penalty has been seen as a fair, eye-to-eye punishment for murder or other homicide-related crimes, but nowadays, we see problems emerging from that theory. While the death penalty may not impact you directly, I think the average person should be educated on this topic because it is an ethical issue in the United States and it should be acted upon. The intention of this presentation is to argue why I think the death penalty should be outlawed. The points I'll be discussing are the moral violations, why it's still legal, possible solutions or replacements, and possible outcomes. So let's get started. Alright, so first of all, moral violations. So, capital punishment violates international law. As stated by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, quote, "The United Nations system as a whole opposes the use of the death penalty in all circumstances. The United Nations recognizes that because it is irreversible, the death penalty is opposed even when backed by legal processes." End quote. The Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution states that no one shall be subjected to cruel or unusual punishment. While the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty in itself does not violate this, execution tactics were ruled by many state courts to be unconstitutional. Despite what media may say, lethal injection is by no means painless. In an NPR article that studied lethal injection autopsies, they realized that in over 200 cases, there have been reports of pulmonary edema, and that basically is a medical term for the lungs filling with fluid. This causes severe pain similar to the feeling of drowning, as well as extreme terror. At the same time, in 7.8% of cases, which came from the same source, the subject did not die on the first dose, and a second dose later had to be administered. Hypocritically enough, severe pain or torture is regarded as cruel and unusual punishment. Also, in many circumstances, the legal justice system can target minorities or people of lower socioeconomic standard. In the true story of the Just Mercy film, a black man was put on death row and executed for a murder he did not commit. So, why is it still legal? This section is not as extensive because there really are very few reasons I found about why it still is legal. And funny enough, one of the most redundant reasons of those is because it's not illegal. Now, this is problematic, obviously. Just because something isn't inherently wrong doesn't mean that it's inherently right. So believe it or not, the United States is actually the only first world country to still use the death penalty. Many advocates for keeping that way argue that such a high-stake punishment could be used as a deterrent for those before they commit a severe crime. Basically saying if someone's life was on the line, then they might not commit that crime. Since America has such a high crime rate, it could be used as a turnaround. However, I feel that most criminals who have an inkling to kill are probably not fazed by the idea of being killed. Others argue that the death penalty pays retribution to the families impacted by homicide. This may be true. However, when I go on to my next point, you might see a possible replacement to this. Alright, so possible solutions or replacements. Life sentences without a chance of parole is a good solution to the death penalty. First of all, a life sentence is typically regarded as equal, if not worse, punishment than the death penalty. So this makes sure that the justice is still being served. Also, despite popular belief, life in prison is much more cost-effective than a death penalty. Yes, housing prisoners for life, feeding them for life, is a lot cheaper than a death penalty. In an article posted by Equal Justice USA, it is stated that more than a dozen states have found that death penalty cases are up to 10 times more expensive than life sentences. This is because when there is a life on the line, a greater amount of legislation is required for that trial, which makes the process more cumbersome and it makes it a lot longer. There needs to be more lawyers, witnesses, more extensive trials, and more documentation. At the same time, nearly 68% of death penalty cases end up being overturned, which just wastes that money and wastes that time. Also, as crazy as this sounds, a lot of those expenses comes out of the taxpayers' pockets. In an article posted by The Ledger, author Jeff Skolin found that Jasper County in Texas, which, by the way, has the highest rate of death penalty executions, raised property taxes by 7% just to pay for a single death penalty case. He also found out that 2 capital cases forced Jefferson County in Florida to freeze employee raises and take funds out of the library budget. So that's a pretty alarming statistic to think about. So what are some probable outcomes for that? The criminal justice system would be more reformed. Death sentences are very long and tedious to go through, and that makes more room for error. Life sentences would make the process more clear and concise. It would save money from the government and citizens, and that money could not only go into improving the criminal justice system directly, but could also go to the impacted families with amenities such as therapy, scholarships, grants, etc. Not to mention, it would help the economy and individuals that have to pay for these unnecessary death sentences. In conclusion, I believe the death penalty should be outlawed because it violates foundational human rights, poses a threat to the economy, and there are also much better workarounds. I believe that every human should have the individual right to live, and those who abuse it should have to live it in captivity. I hope after this presentation, I've turned your opinion, or at least made you rethink your opinion on the death penalty. Thank you for listening. Be safe. I'm out.